All right, welcome everyone. Today we're joined by Rob Cotter. Am I saying that right? Rob
Cotter,
Cotter?
like a cotter pin, yeah.
Okay, Rob Cotter. Rob Cotter is the inventor and founder of Organic Transit, which made a solar-powered velomobile, basically, that we covered on this channel a few years back when I was looking at other solar-powered vehicles. And he's graciously decided to come spend some time with us and talk to us because he's recently reacquired the rights to the Elf, but we're going to get to that. So welcome, Rob.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, no problem. Hey, so tell me a little bit about your background. How what did you do in the early days? You worked for some automotive companies and yeah, just tell me your background.
Yeah, so I mostly majored in animal behavior in college. I just was so fascinated with that. But for me, I felt like there was no job here. But while I
Mhm.
was in college, I used to uh, work on race cars and had those skill sets. And so when I got out, I moved to California. This is New York. I moved to California and got a job pretty quickly with Porsche. And uh, mostly on the regular kind of consumer side, but we did maintain cars. The largest Porsche collection in the world. That was also concourse cars and race cars and things like that. And then I moved over to BMW, which I had a lot of experience with that back in my earlier days. And but during that time period, I would watch what was happening not too far from me in Pasadena, where they were assembling and designing these pedal-powered aircraft. And at
Mm.
the time, they would only flutter around, maybe a quarter mile or do a figure eight over a half mile or something. But I was just so blown away because, I'm working on 3, 4, 500 horsepower sports cars, and this guy is flying around on a half a horsepower. And I realized everything we're doing is wrong.
Mm.
And I became involved in the International Human Powered Vehicle Association. I became vice president of the land division, which is also air and water for boats and aircraft, and put on their speed championships and um, just saw all the designs coming through. There would be hundreds of vehicles coming through every year, and you'd see, wow, that's the wildest brake system I ever imagined. Look at that lean steering system, and all these things weighed just pounds, right? Um, but they were going, you know, at that time, 50 to 60 miles an hour on, half horsepower, maybe 1 horsepower for a few seconds, and it was really specifically timed out, worked out, and I'll tell you a funny little story here. Is we got approached by General Motors that said, we love the event, we love all that's going on, and we want to have this event in our GM proving grounds, and we'll pay for your 100 or 200 vehicles to come out to this event. We'll pay for it all. We'll pay for the hotels, everything, except it's only for you guys and selected people we choose and selected members of the press only. And we get to own all the data that comes off of that.
Hmm.
And the bylaws for the International Human Powered Vehicle Association was always we make the events as cheap as possible so anybody and everybody can come and witness it. And we don't limit the press ever. And so I had to kind of sorry, we can't do that, even though it's the greatest offer we ever could have imagined in many regards.
Yeah.
So the guy came out and met with the organization leadership in Los Angeles, and that became the start of the GM Sun Racer,
Oh yeah.
and eventually the what was called initially the Impact, which became the EV1 and the EV2. That was all built by sort of some of the leaders of the human powered vehicle movement.
Ah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
yeah.
So yeah,
So
these are like velomobiles that are like really low to the ground, and there's like either one or some of them had two people pedaling, right? Like back to back.
some had 5 people.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
some of them were like streamlined 21 speed unicycles,
Okay.
recumbent unicycles. And some of them, there was a 4 passenger one that was very Aptera like in the aerodynamic shell.
Okay.
Uh, one version of it was called Pegasus. And you could probably Google it up. But when you see it, you say, oh, yeah, yeah, that could be an Aptera kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I think yeah, so the variety of shapes and sizes was unlimited. In fact, the rule was there was no rules. It
Hmm.
just had to be human powered. That was it. And eventually they incorporated hey, you know what? We'll have a subcategory. We could have a little tiny electric motor, but it wasn't allowed necessarily to compete with the high speed vehicles. Um,
Okay.
but it was a fascinating time. The things that came out of it that actually assisted in like aerodynamic ski outfits for the Olympics and cycling, for drones. It's really amazing all the technology that came out of that time period because of the emphasis on efficiency.
Mm.
Um, and so I had that sort of library of um, ways to do things stored up in my mind. I built some bicycle fairings back then that were just little bubbles, and I
Okay.
built an oven to be able to make those fairings. And I got grants from DuPont and oh, who's the other? Du- I can't think of it. Maybe it's like an Arco Plastic division, but um, blow molding plastics and all these things. You want to figure this stuff out as
Mhm.
you expand and build the types of vehicles you want. So once in a while, I could make a living off of what I was doing, but mostly not. And so I kind of stayed in the auto industry, mostly working with Porsche, BMW, sometimes McLaren or AMG or Mercedes occasionally. But um, then I kind of jumped into media, and I was a creative director for a multimedia company in the early 90s, if anyone knows what that might have been like. But, there's something that just came out, and let's call it 92 or something, the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
And it was really fun and fascinating, but it helped me understand on how to launch projects, how to communicate, um, dealing with a variety of media, and then how to do some guerrilla marketing.
Hmm.
And fast forward to about 2010, I was up in New York doing work, and I'm thinking about actually, I was working with a friend of mine's business. He had a bike rental sharing company at the old World's Fairgrounds, and he had pedal boats and he had uh, pedicabs and all these different things that people could try out, hand cycles. And I was going to do a little documentary about, the state of bicycling. And I realized, the bicycle that really needs to be built has not been built. And it's
Okay.
the one that, an 85-year-old person can hop into and go across town. It's the one that's safer in an accident. It's the one that protects you in weather. It's the one that can carry passengers and cargo and, really super efficient and safe. And so, uh, Michael Lewis, an old friend of mine, we've done many projects together. In 1988, we did the American Solar Cup, the first solar car race in Visalia, California, in the U.S. And that was fascinating because the solar cars that everyone was so, you know, believed so much that they were so slow and had such short range. The winning vehicle went 93 miles an hour and um, covered, I think, 155 miles in a couple of hours at
Mm.
like an average speed of like 63 miles an hour. And interestingly, for the solar car crowd, the event started about noon. And of course, they're all fully charged. For the winner, it stopped at say, 2:30 or something. And he stopped and we had celebration and a barbecue and stuff. By the end of the day, the car that just had done 160 miles and it only went down to a half a charge was back up to a full charge. So that day, that solar vehicle could have done a 320-mile range. And again, like I said, was the state troopers that were guiding us through the race said, go for it. When we got on I-5, just go for it.
Uh-huh.
And they said they had a hard time keeping up with them. And
Wow.
so um,
Do you remember the name of that car?
that was a Selectria, I think, 4, and it was built by the team from MIT. A guy,
Okay.
James Warden, really wonderful guy, was the
Uh,
pilot and kind of led the team. And interestingly enough, Honda was sort of like a background sponsor. Like they made videos of it and they helped
mhm.
organize some things, whatever. They came out with these giant gull-wing motorcycles where the guys with the easy steady cams could hang off like a trapeze up the side of the motorcycle and film it.
Uh-huh.
And they had a bunch of engineers there. And allegedly, when they left there, they ended up with the design from that event for the Insight, for the
Okay.
Honda Insight, the hybrid
Okay.
vehicle.
Mm.
And the reason they came up with that, it was sort of an offshoot of the Acura, um, their sports car.
The
Uh,
Integra or the
no,
NSX?
NSX. It was an
Oh.
offshoot of the NSX,
Oh.
and of sorts. And supposedly, they had like $30,000 into every one they built at that time. Those early versions. Really a
Hmm.
terrific car, aerodynamically very nice.
Yeah.
Um, and people still drive them around to this day. But Honda was a big player at that event and took a lot out of it. Um, and so here we are at like 2010, and with Michael Lewis, and we're kind of designing what this vehicle should be like, and we start out with the parameters of like who's buying it and why.
Hmm.
So we started off with like a Whole Foods customer. If
Okay.
they're investing that much thought and time into their food and their diet and they want organic, do they really want diesel trucks hauling it around for them? Or do they want to jump in their SUV to just go get those organic celery or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds a little bit funny, but it's a model to work off of.
Yeah.
And if you look at the numbers and their affluence and all those things, it makes some sense.
Okay.
And so we started sketching and sketching and sketching. And based on both of our experience that we've had, Michael is a prolific transportation designer, and we worked on that for a while. And we came up with, again, it's the compromise. How do
Hmm.
you make what you really want with the technology that's actually available, the
Right.
manufacturability, addressing the market, keeping the price where you need it to be? And so at that point, we kind of knew what we needed to do, and we played with the design back and forth. He's up in Maine. I was in New York at the time, for about a year, year and a half. And I got back to North Carolina, and I was building prototypes out of my garage, the crudest prototypes possible, right? So I could just test weight ratios, center of gravity, power, all sorts of things like what works and what doesn't, so I could quickly like toss that aside and gain the knowledge from that. Paul McCready had um, a motto that if something's worth making, it's worth making crappy,
Hmm.
because you can just get through really quickly and not invest a whole bunch of time into it. Okay, that's a fail. No, not a big deal.
Uh,
Or it's a success, and we know we can incorporate it in the next rendition. So I'm popping those out, and I joined a incubator in downtown Durham for startups. And, well, I joined. They accepted me, and it was like a 3-month program. They give you office space and tell you how to put together slide decks and deal with financing and stuff like that, dealing with investors, elevator pitches, etc. And
mhm.
they'd come, and I made as much use of it as I could. And they'd come to me and say, if you could have that vehicle built in the 3 months when this is over, that'd be so cool. And I was like, do you think I could build a vehicle if I'm sitting here every day in
Yeah.
3 months? I was like, when I'm in building phase, you'll never see me. I'll be gone. And so, but I ended up accessing some, really inexpensive shop space or free shop space, getting some really uh, uh, low dollar angel investors and stuff. I said, that's it, I'm doing it.
Hmm.
And we had a charrette. A charrette is sort of like a brainstorming session, right? Where you
Okay.
oftentimes artists will get together over potentially like a 24-hour period, and they'll drink tons of coffee and smoke cigarettes and come up with all these ideas. Well, we did a charrette for a week long straight.
Okay.
And the only time we weren't together is when we fell asleep for like 5 or 6 hours a night. We get back together, and from breakfast to we fell asleep, we were just working away. And we broke up in two parts. It was four of us. Two guys worked on frame, and Michael Lewis and I worked on the body. And we worked on like uh, big foam core designs that we had already sketched out on full-size blueprints, laid them out, cut the foam so we could step through it and that. And at the end of the week, we actually had something that was kind of usable and fit the form factor we were hoping for.
Hmm.
And then 3 months later from that, we actually had the molds built and the first actual ELF prototype 3 months later. And 3 months after that, we built about five more like that. We were testing out the molds. We were making them out of fiberglass. But
Hmm.
then we made the tooling so you could vacuum form them.
Okay.
So we did all the tooling we needed, the jigs for the frame and all that. And then 3 months later, so 9 months total, we had about 10 betas coming out of the manufacturing process. And we did a Kickstarter campaign on like December 21st. And in 30 days, we sold 51 units, and we delivered them all by August. And we never
Oh.
really stopped building them. And uh, the intent at the time, we
Okay,
sold them
so
before
tell me again, what was the total time frame from when you had that thing where you guys were working,
the charrette. Yes,
the charrette, until you
yes.
delivered the vehicle? Is it a
Oh, so
year and a
so
half?
so we at the let's see, it was probably like a year and 2 months,
Mhm.
and we delivered. We just didn't deliver a vehicle; we delivered 51 vehicles. We
Okay,
delivered our first 8 or 10 daters in about 7, 8 months.
okay. And so in a little over a year, you had delivered 51 vehicles from the time you started building these
Yeah,
things, basically.
right, right.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome.
Yes. Well, we knew that, we go talk to investors and they're like, yeah, this is really cool, but yeah, you can't do that.
Uh-huh.
And every time they said no, we were like, oh, okay, well, watch this. And we were working, or
Yeah,
mostly
how
I
did you
was
guys
working.
fund this? Through Kickstarter? Is that mainly how you funded it?
So the Kickstarter has allowed us to produce those 51 because we
Uh-huh.
lost $800 on each vehicle. And
Okay.
we knew that going in.
Okay.
But we wanted, so now we had 50 vehicles out there
Uh,
covering thousands of miles. Now you
yeah.
think, what would it take to have a couple of engineers cover, tens of thousands of miles with a variety of vehicles out there? It would
Yeah.
be unaffordable.
Yeah.
But for us, it was about, $40,000 or whatever it came to, and it
Uh,
was quite doable. But one of the distinct advantages we had at that time was I was literally working 100-hour weeks.
okay.
So it sounds ridiculous. It sounds tiring. Who wants to do that? But what it does do, it allows you to cover a year of work in a few months.
Hmm.
And if you do that for a year, you've covered years of work. Of course, you might lose years of your
Life.
life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd come home at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. My wife would be on the couch asleep watching TV.
Uh,
And hey, I'm home. She goes, what are you doing home so early? um, but so that's what it was like. And I ended up having a couple of really great core key people that stayed with me through the whole process.
mhm.
And we just kept on banging them out, which, is the opposite issue, right? From almost every other vehicle startup
Yeah.
is they do great drawings, great renderings and all these things and
Right.
really good at raising money.
Yeah.
But how many do they produce? And, you could look at whoever, all these different truck companies, or so many of them, so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
of them.
There's so many startups. They all have really nice ideas and prototypes,
Yeah,
but it's very, very hard to make it to production. Almost no one makes it to production.
right. And so
I
we just,
mean, in their defense, those are way more complicated than a velomobile.
that's right.
Yeah.
Um, but the trick is, because there are, you know, let's say tens of thousands, literally there are hundreds of thousands of velomobiles out there, but
Mhm.
most of them, the vast majority are one or two off. You could not really put them into production. They're too
Yeah.
fine tuned, they're too hand built. And that's
Yeah.
wonderful. It's lovely. So we had to like break that mold and say, how do you really build these in volume?
Yeah. I mean, I personally looked at buying some velomobiles. They are insanely expensive.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm not getting a velomobile because I mean, it was like a car basically.
Well, the other part that's, um, uh, in traffic is like your head's right about bumper height.
Yes, yeah. And
And
that's why you guys made the elf taller.
it's
Because you
5 feet tall.
sacrifice aerodynamics for that.
Yes, but right. So it's not aerodynamic like a velomobile, and truthfully, almost nothing is.
Hmm.
But it's about as aerodynamic as a bicycle rider on the drop down handlebars.
Okay, really?
Yeah, so you could have two
Oh,
people in a vehicle and all your groceries and scooting along, and it's about as efficient as a guy in the drops. So, we Michael Lewis and I have a pretty good handle on aerodynamics
hmm.
over decades of watching what works and doesn't work and just kind of loving the whole technology. And so when we had a group come in and do fluid dynamic testing on their computers, they're like, "Oh, we're going to make all these changes for you. It's going to be great." And we're like, "Oh, okay." And they came back and, it's really pretty good. When we put a floor in it, it didn't really improve too much. When we put doors on, it didn't really improve too much. And
Hmm. That's
and
surprising to me.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
But when you go in really focused on knowing what's So there was the combination of aerodynamics.
Uh-huh.
And then if you look at the body was made to be shipped in volume around the world. So the bodies are stackable.
Mm-hmm.
And all the center panels are flat stock. So there's not a lot of compound curves, which, as a guy that used to blow mold like windshields for um, little formula racers and lightweight aircraft, compound curves, blow and plastic, it's the most expensive thing, right? It's just, I didn't want to get into it. A nice flat stock is optically really good, really cheap, really easy. So the center part of the ELF, the solar panel, the carbon fiber panels, the windshield, the rear window, the hatchback, is all flat stock. And all the curves are on these side panels that nest together.
Mm-hmm.
And so we sold about 850 in about 7 years. We never stopped building them. We never stopped doing iterations on them. Of course, at some point we had to make some money, and
Yeah.
so we kept on boosting the price as we figured out what we were doing, so we could lower the supply chain costs or lower the time being spent building it, raise some funds, do
So
some bulk deals.
how are you guys supporting yourselves all this time while you're basically like not making money?
Well, it wasn't like we weren't making money. It was we were surviving on revenue, but so many of these vehicle companies, again, they will say, oh, we got 1,000, 10,000, 50,000 deposits. Well, we had 850 people that paid basically 100% up front.
Uh-huh.
They would give us the full funds so that we could build them their vehicle. And in
Okay.
some cases, we'd have them like, say, 30, 40% complete. So sometimes they get them in a few weeks, sometimes they got it in a few months, depending on what our supply chain was doing.
Okay. I just threw this up so that people who are not familiar with the ELF kind of have a picture of like what we're talking about.
Right. So you can see the lower left there, there's a mom with a couple of her kids in the back. It was really a nice feature
Uh-huh.
when we introduced the two-seater. And the one on the right was called the Tactical. And the Tactical was mostly made for like potentially like police departments, which actually a lot of them did buy it. And it had, instead of the basic 750 watt motor, which is at the time the maximum for what's legally an e-bike,
Uh-huh.
that one had like an 1100 watt motor. But an
Okay.
1100 watt motor and a little vehicle like that is a big difference.
Mm.
It's a great big difference. And so we survived that way. We took some investment over the years, um, but most of the time investors would say, wow, we love what you're doing, and I want to buy some for my summer home or for my kids or whatever, but we really don't get involved in the solar electric vehicle space, which I'm sure a lot of folks that work at Aptera have heard something similar to that.
Uh-huh.
Um, but the cool thing was, when we go, um, what we would learn from our customers, like some of them were going 10, 12,000 miles a year.
Wow.
So the challenge here is you think about how many bicycles actually go 10,000 miles a year, right?
Yeah.
And I
Not very
can't
many.
pretend not very many. The
Mhm.
average US bicycle goes about 25 miles a year,
Oh,
right?
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And the average ELF was going about 2,300 miles a year.
Okay.
So how do you take a bicycle technology device and kind of turn it into a automotive like experience? And
Mm-hmm.
so, this woman was cranking out. She's doing a bunch of miles. She goes, I only have like 3,500 miles on my ELF. I've had it like 6 months, but I
Mm-hmm.
already got to replace the tires. Now you think about it. How many people ever in their lives put 3,500 miles on that bicycle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you do as a commuter,
Yeah.
but
I put in about 5,000 a year on my bike.
wow, there
Yeah.
we go. Yeah.
So,
So
yeah.
maybe you
So,
go through a
but
couple of sets of tires.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I go through tires for
Yeah.
sure.
And so she comes back and she goes, why do I have to put tires on my Honda Civic? I'll get like 80,000 miles on it. I said, well,
Yeah.
the Honda Civic tires are probably costing you $150 and these are, $25. But the other part, this is bicycle stuff. If you want to be at that level of efficiency, if you want to get the equivalent of a couple of thousand miles per gallon,
Mhm.
how do you lean on that bicycle experience and give that automotive robustness? So like
Yeah.
everything's got to be waterproof, everything's got to be heavy duty.
Hmm.
So we turned to a lot of downhill mountain bike racing components and big axles, really simplified objects and aspects to keep it all. Um, we had really, few warranty programs. Out of 850 units, it came to like 3% or 4%. We had warranty issues.
Mhm.
Um, the We were the first, I'm sure, bicycle company to not only, of course, offer solar and all that stuff. We had 24/7 roadside assistance.
Okay, tell me about that.
So we just brokered with like a AAA type of company. We
Okay.
paid their first year's fee for them as part
Okay.
of the price of buying an elf. And, if they happen to break down, which of course happens with everything on the planet, if it breaks down, a guy would come out with his flatbed, his rollback, and take them where they got to go.
Okay.
And, um,
That's like a little
and,
overkill for the elf.
but you know what? It gave reassurance to the
Uh,
consumer.
yeah, yeah. Okay, yep.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so, and then we put out probably 30 videos on how people can do the little repairs and maintenance themselves.
Hmm.
And, uh, again, how they use them is amazing. A lot of people pulling trailers and not necessarily small trailers.
Hmm.
So the Elf, although it's 160 pounds, it had a 550-pound payload. So,
Okay.
which is on an efficiency standpoint, right? That's what you dream of. Right
Yeah.
now you have a 4 or 5,000 pound car vehicle carrying a 200-pound person.
Yeah.
So we think of it as like the person should be the heaviest thing about the whole equation.
Okay.
And if you can make the vehicle less than the person, wow, you're really starting to make some strides here. And
Hmm.
that same level of efficiency scales out to cargo.
Okay.
So now it can do 550, but it can probably pull, don't hold me to this, like a 6, 7, 8. I know there's people pulling 800-pound trailers. I know that.
Mm. Wow.
And
So
part,
how many of these things did you like end up selling?
so 850 units we delivered. We probably made, over 900 with the, demos and prototypes and stuff. But those 850 covered over 10 million miles.
Wow.
We know that. We got lots of feedback and
Uh-huh.
we were staying in contact. And out of those, this is an important factor for people that are concerned because they look at that and it's like, oh, that looks like a death trap. Well, out of the 10 million miles, we followed about 25 pretty significant accidents with cars and trucks. Some of the cars and trucks going, over 50 miles an hour when they impacted the elk,
Hmm.
and there was no deaths and no serious injuries.
Okay. That
So
seems almost unbelievable.
that's right. And so you think of like you're in a bicycle or even a motorcycle and you get bumped by a car at literally any speed, you're going to fall down. You're going to get some kind of hurt. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully you're protected some way and have a leather jacket on or whatever's Kevlar,
Uh-huh.
but you get hurt somewhat, right? Of
Yeah,
course. And
absolutely.
and if you look at the numbers, lots of people get really hurt, and not just in this country, but all over the world, all
Hmm.
the time from cars and bicycles. So the Elf has a safety cell,
Hmm.
and basically it's an ultralight vehicle that there's an integral safety, innate safety in an ultralight vehicle. So I did a crash study back in the early 80s when I was with the Human Powered Vehicle Association,
Hmm.
because out of hundreds of vehicles and they're racing on velodromes and they're drag racing and doing all this stuff, they undoubtedly got into a variety of accidents. And the
Yeah.
thing that came up is like, wow, like that guy just hit this giant camera tripod. Back then, cameras were like big and heavy
Mhm.
at 60 miles an hour, and he didn't get hurt. He crashed and spun around and did all sorts of stuff, and he got out and he brushed himself off,
Hmm.
and he was okay. And so I started studying it, and it turns out, as motorcycle riders know, if you have something between you and pavement, that's great, right? So if you have something or 2 or 3 layers of something, so it's Kevlar, it's leather, it's
Hmm.
things, you have much better chance of not getting hurt. Well, that's what a shell is on a velomobile. And
Hmm.
that's what the shell is on an elf, except that we weren't constrained by high speed. We made a vehicle that actually fit into the minimal bicycle infrastructure that we have in the United States today.
Hmm.
So it sits at 4 feet wide, and people say, "Oh, that's so wide." Yeah, well, you know what? If you got side hit by a car, you would like that extra 17 inches between you and the impact zone. So it
Okay.
hits plastic, right? It hits
Hmm.
plastic. It eventually starts to crumple. It then it hits the aluminum that starts to reflect, it starts to deflect. So it both absorbs and
Hmm.
deflects the impact. And so you think about a ping pong ball, like what does it take to hurt a ping pong ball? Like you could smack it with, Arnold Schwarzenegger hit that ping pong ball and he's probably not going to cave it in. Or you think about a couple of kayaks zipping around and bopping against rocks and stuff. They kind of really don't get hurt so much. But you
Yeah.
take two multi-ton vehicles and they hit each other and they're fighting for real estate.
Hmm.
They are, they have their crumple zones and they're impacting, but neither is moving. So when those cars and trucks hit the elf immediately ricocheted and
Yeah.
left the scene of the crime,
Hmm.
essentially.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of its saving grace was
Yeah.
the way it's designed, the crumple zones we have built in. So without revealing so much, woman and her daughter, they're sitting at a traffic light, just waiting for it to turn green. They're just in the regular car lane, the way some bicycles are, right?
Yeah.
And car comes flying along, probably texting, didn't even see a red light, just impacts that rear wheel, crumples the rear wheel, kind of sends them forward a bit. They're shaken up. The vehicle gets sent back to our shop. It had a crumpled carbon fiber panel that we were able to just pop out. We replaced the rear wheel because the rear wheel collapsed, and then
Hmm.
the collapsing of the rear wheel absorbed the impact.
Mm. Yeah.
And they were back riding to school again the next day
Okay. Yeah, that's
without
very
any injury.
interesting. So like, yeah, I see that like a lighter vehicle is going to like deflect off
Yes.
and fly away, which is like one of the things we talk about, like, when people see the elf, the first thing they think is like, oh my goodness, that's a death trap. I'm gonna die. Some SUV is gonna hit me. And then that's also one of the first one or two things people will say when they see the Aptera too. They're like, oh my goodness, that thing's a death trap. Um, so I think that's a very interesting thing. Now the other flip side of the coin is like obviously if you're like impacting like this and you're the lighter vehicle, you're going to deflect off this way, and the G forces you're going to experience as a occupant are going to be significant.
Yes.
But I see like if you're kind of like a glancing blow or like a rear ending thing where you're kind of like not the differential in speed isn't that great. I can see why that would be good.
And then, of course, you do want sub-assemblies underneath all of that
Mhm.
that are responding in an appropriate way, right? So certain things are smashing and absorbing the impact and breaking away, and other things are helping protect you a little bit.
Mhm.
We're
Yeah.
probably also the first bicycle to offer a seat belt. Now, ironically, we had uh, an engineer from Tesla, high level automotive guy, said, "Don't put the seatbelt in there because
Mhm.
it's given perceived perception that it's safer and you're required and all these things could lead to lawsuits." I was like, "Oh God, here we go, lawyers." But
Mhm.
we ended up putting it in the rear seat, and sometimes two of them, so people could buckle their little kid in the back seat
Yeah.
or buckle in a child carrier seat.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's the only way they could actually do that. So we
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
the seat belt back there.
Oh, interesting. So then, so you sold like 800 and some of these things, and then then what happened?
So we were always, fundraising, and most of the investors we had were the right kind of mindset people, right? Perhaps
Mhm.
very a large part like the Aptera investors, right?
Mhm.
So you don't have to like go into a big song and dance if once they understand the concept and the efficiency and the state of the world and the environment.
Mhm.
Oh, this is the way things should be going. And so we had a lot of those kind of investors that were very much fans and supporters and cheerleaders, and and but we have to break out of that circle, right? We really need VCs, and we
Mhm.
met with some pretty heavy hitters, and they're just wow, um, nothing's kind of good enough in a way. But
Uh-huh.
we were actually in Santa Monica. We were meeting with a very uh, famous investor there at the time, and while we're there, we pull up to some Whole Foods somewhere, and people just lined up. There was literally a line of people about 50 deep, and it just kept on fulfilling. And they're like, because we let them sit in it. It wasn't even a drive or
Yeah.
anything, because we were like talking away. And we just parked on the sidewalk there. And I would say about 15% of the people that came and sat in it said, "Can I invest?" It
Mhm.
was just like people, regular folks, see something that they think is important, they want to be part of it. And so there was an investor there at the time that saw us, and he's talking to his buddies on the biz jet up ahead and stuff. And oh, this is such a big deal. So he ended up wanting to. We had a Series A round, and he said, "I'll take the entire Series A round."
Okay.
And he gave us a pretty sizable check of earnest money, and we were supposed to get the money like in 6 weeks, and then it was supposed to be in 12 weeks and 18 weeks. Fast forward to 9 months, where like we were really depending on that. And we kind of cut off fundraising, so to speak, and
Yeah.
we're really planning on that. He's like, I'd really prefer to take you over in distress than just be a partial investor into the company.
Oh.
And
Huh.
It's kind of it's getting hit in the knees, literally,
Yeah.
so we were looking to protect all the investors and customers and everything else, and we had to put it into bankruptcy, which he acquired it for
Huh.
millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And at that time we were literally talking to Bridgestone, Volkswagen, Buell, um, some of the big electric bus companies, even out of India. But he got it, and he put sizable amount of money, more money into it. But it's kind of like people look at things and go, "Oh, I could do that,"
Mhm.
and the reality is it's not easy. And there's a lot of finesse that went into building that. Every vehicle is custom, hand built, bespoke, and that's the entire ELF project. It was an MVP. Those 850 units were, which they call as a marginally viable product, and
Okay.
it sounds derogatory, but
Yeah, it
it's
does.
not at all. Yeah,
Okay.
it does.
What does that
But it's
mean?
so it means like you got something that checks all the boxes. But if you really had your way, what would you do to it now? So it's kind of like a stage 3 prototype or something, perhaps like some of the Aptera prototypes right now, right?
Mhm.
Like we all love them and people look at them and, oh, I'd love to have that. But the guys that built it, they know what's wrong with them.
Mhm.
And they're looking to make the changes, whether it's for efficiency or comfort or reliability or manufacturability, all those things, what's the changes that you would make? And
Mhm.
so these were 850 MVPs that went out there. Everyone was built basically um, the uh, on the on the payments. The price of the vehicle was paying for it,
Okay.
and we were doing R&D the whole time. We made about 400 changes, from little rubber washes to the location of the motor and stuff during that
Mhm.
time period, because we kept on getting feedback. As soon as we get a warranty issue, we're like, oh, we know what that's about. Ding, 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 ding. Make the change, get it up into the assembly line,
Mhm.
change the supply chain a little bit, change the standard operating procedures. We had about 800 CAD drawings for the ELF
Mhm.
that were constantly being updated and upgraded. And we would also plan out maybe, you know, uh, 5, 10 hours a week. What's ELF 2.0 look like?
Okay.
What does that really change out? And we just were never to the point, because we're busy building. We never got to the point where we could build, or we did some 2.0s, crude prototypes, but like, what's it like to deliver the 2.0? So we can lower the bill of materials. We can lower the number of parts. We can
Mm.
lower the amount of hand building. We can lower the maintenance and serviceability. We can make it easier to get in and out of. Um, all those things. That's what the ELF 2.0 is. And now that through some close friends of mine and some previous ELF investors from the original iteration have hopped on board and allowed me to buy back the company.
Okay.
And so now we're doing a relaunch, and we'll be turning out the ELF 2.0,
Okay.
as well as some
When
other vehicles.
when can we expect the ELF 2.0?
So we have to do some fundraising,
Okay.
and we're taking orders, and the order list is growing substantially all the time. I'm very happy to say, and then
Mhm.
we'll figure those things out, right? Like Again, it's easy to talk about Aptera. Like, how did they do that with the list? You mentioned like how you had a place where people could sign up
Yeah, yeah.
on your social media and things like that. So we have yet to really figure those things out in its entirety, but we do have about 15,000 people that are interested in getting a new elf
Mm,
at this
okay.
time.
So, but like the first time you guys did it, you guys, I guess, kind of bootstrapped it and built it by hand yourself. This time, you guys need funding to get it started. You can't bootstrap it and kind of do it the way you did it the first time. Because I think
So,
let me tell you where this question's coming from if you haven't been following the channel very closely. So Aptera, they've been the second round, they've been going since 2020, so it's been 4 years. And a lot of people are like, hey, they should have just like started hand building a few of these things, getting them out there, then iterating, like you said you did, and then maybe using that to go to like maybe Aptera 2.0, which is, and I think Aptera like decided just to like go straight to Aptera 2.0 and do this high volume thing because they just got way more orders than they expected, I guess. Um, so people, I think, heard your first story and be like, "Look, that's exactly what Aptera should have done. They should have just like had a couple of guys, get a group of people, start building these things, and then iterate." But now you're saying you're doing the whole funding thing. So explain your thought process on that.
so first off, um, so even though we did bootstrap, we did have um, dozens of people prepay,
Mhm.
which is okay.
Yeah.
And the other part is that we did have some investors. Um, um, no seven figures, but kind of some stuff to get rolling. The other part is because I have the experience. We were able to build the jigs and the molds in house. So
Mhm.
we would go to the suppliers and they're like, "Oh, who did your molds?" And we're like, "We did." And they were like, "No one builds their own molds."
Mhm.
So because of my experience, every 10 years or so, I would build some kind of weird vehicle or boat molds or something like that. So I know what to do to get that done. And of course, because of CNC machines and CADs and stuff like that, it happens faster and easier too. But
Mhm.
it's still a slog. But so we could save hundreds of thousands of dollars in mold costs and tooling to set up for vacuum forming and rotomolding and things like that in house, and
Okay.
that's pretty cool. And so, um, um, let's see. The other part is that I'm trying to put this in a way that's considerate for everybody,
Okay.
including including your audience, because I love them and I'm one of them.
Mhm.
But what people love, we love the thought, the image, the fantasy of it, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's not a person on your group that doesn't want to get their Aptera. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
But as the anticipation builds, the desire builds and allows them to raise the money that really actually is needed to go forward. And so that's what we're looking to do now, because the reality is the reason we ended up in that situation is because we just said, build it and they will come. And we
Mhm.
could never build as many as we could sell.
Mhm.
We just didn't have the capital
Mhm.
to, we had very good margins on the vehicle,
Mhm.
but let's say a $10,000 elf, still requires $6,000 each in materials.
Mhm.
And then you still have to build it
Yeah, the
and
labor.
deliver it, the whole thing. So
Yeah.
if you can build 10,000 vehicles, well, you need that amount of money just to go up front. And if you go into banking and you go into investors and they talk about factoring, oh, you got all these orders. Well, here's an advance at 20% interest.
Uh-huh.
Oh, well, that's not so good because our margins, and we're
Uh-huh.
trying to survive. But the point of it is, if you have the money up front and you can prove that you can be good stewards of that capital and
Mhm.
deliver on the product, well, everybody wins, because not only will you make money, but the product ends up being cheaper and higher quality.
Mhm. If you're saying that if you get a big fund of money at the beginning, you can negotiate like better supplier agreements and things like that. Is that what, am I
That's
understanding it correctly?
that's a big part of it. That's correct. But it's also the everything, right? So you need some dry powder for
Mhm.
when things get rough, or you know, um, something happens throughout the world that affects supply chain, whether it's COVID or a war or something. You
Mhm.
know, I think I mentioned it, or I don't know if I mentioned. You know, container shipping has nearly tripled in costs this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, who's factoring in for that? Well, somebody, I suppose, but like,
Yeah.
it would be unfair to try and pretend that you can overcome all those things. I'll tell you one thing we had to overcome
Mhm.
is that we had some extruded aluminum parts. Those are our parts. And that's
Okay.
cool, right? That kind of protects your design and everything.
Mhm.
And um, we wanted to do an upgrade of it. We needed new extrusions. We could not get aluminum extrusions done in the US.
Okay.
Now, someone else probably pop up, oh, you didn't go to Acmeo in Ohio or
Yeah,
something, but
yeah, yeah.
I can tell you, we looked long and hard
Uh-huh.
and we weren't getting anything.
Yeah.
And so we went through China and got some extrusions done. The part was everything we wanted it to be. And I got a couple of deliveries in. And then when they get a letter from Homeland Security, it
Uh,
says, oh, the parts are waiting for you on the dock, and you are liable for 127% trade tariff on those parts.
oh, wow.
127%. So people complain about 25 and 30. We had 127%. And we
Mhm.
all we're doing is building in this country little solar electric vehicles.
Uh-huh.
So I looked into it, and congressmen and senators and stuff. Oh, we don't know anything about this. Oh, and so I paid it, and I
Mhm.
checked off the box that said, yeah, I'm disputing it. And for quick math, that meant um, that your $10,000 part, your shipment that just came in, is $27,000 now,
Yes.
and we're doing dozens of those.
Yeah.
And so, how can that substantiate? So we moved it to Taiwan, which dropped it down to like 27%, and it was fine.
Yeah.
But the reason it became an issue, because we had the whole elf built in China, it wouldn't have been nearly that much.
Uh-huh.
And we all know that Walmart imports lots more than that. And you can bet they've never paid 127% trade tariff on anything.
Yeah.
The issue was when we got it here,
Mhm.
we would take these long pieces and we'd cut them into segments that we needed. And we'd
Okay.
drill the holes and put them where we wanted them and make all sorts of things like an erector set with them. It was
Okay.
really pretty cool and innovative. But that was our fault, that we were building product and creating jobs with those Chinese products here in the US.
Okay, what do you mean by that was your fault?
Because somewhere deep in that tariff, you were only supposed to get the stuff from China and resell it. You're not supposed to do
Oh,
manufacturing with it.
oh, really? Okay. Huh.
Yeah,
Wow. Weird.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
That seems
these are things.
counter, that means that seems counterproductive. Like you'd want American jobs created and
Yes,
more of the
right,
manufacturing done here. And you're
right.
you were kind of using that part sort of as a kind of a raw material kind of thing.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
right. And no
Hmm.
one else could use it. It was just for us.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm. Interesting.
So those are the challenges that come up. So you need some dry powder. You need people to invest in what they like to see the future of transportation to be.
Hmm.
And you know, can it and should it be a vehicle that gets to 2,000, 2,500 miles per gallon, equivalent? Should it be something that if you're under 20 miles, this is what you'd like to use? It
Hmm.
makes you healthier, it makes the community safer, and it makes
Hmm.
the planet cleaner. That's the way our whole product development system should be moving towards,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it
Yeah.
really should. If
I'm
you,
with you.
yeah, I know that you are, but
Uh-huh.
it's been probably a long time, I think, that that has kind of disappeared from what product designer's goal is. It's
Uh-huh.
pardon me, all you guys out there, but most of it's to like, okay, what do the investors want to see? Oh, what's going to get the most clicks? Oh, what's going to um, require replacement in 2 years? You know, a GE washer and dryer, right?
Uh-huh.
Some people had them for 40 years,
Yeah.
and um, and now I've talked to a GE engineer years ago. He said, look, we don't care if it breaks the moment it hits the house. Just get it out the door.
Hmm.
And they'll just replace it because they're making them so cheaply, they can just
Yeah.
swap them out. So it's that, simple term is pre-planned obsolescence.
Right.
But what if you actually made a product that you want to last?
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so, we've never had a frame failure on an Elf ever.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's there's no paint, there's no post welding heat treating. Um, and it's slightly overbuilt, of course, but we've never had a frame failure.
Hmm.
You're a bike guy. Think about bottom bracket problems and dropout problems, or steering bar, handlebar stems and things.
Yeah.
Um, and so to develop a quality product that's going to hold up to UV, that's able to be maintained, to replace those parts simply and easily, is really not anything to do with an automobile.
Mm. Yeah.
And it's something different but similar to a bicycle.
Okay.
And I think if we use the bicycle as the base and work up from there towards a car, we have a whole new set of dynamics that we can
Yeah.
design towards.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So you're like trying to, yeah, you're going from a bicycle up. Aptera is kind of going from a car down.
Yes.
Like you're kind of going towards each other a little bit. Um, so when like, so you guys are still looking for investors before you can even give a time frame for when this ELF 2.0 is coming out. Is that right?
Yes. So we're actually developing 2.0 prototypes as we speak.
Mm.
We're servicing to a very minor extent some of the legacy elves that are out there. We have two other vehicles we've developed prototypes for already,
Hmm.
which are really pretty groundbreaking, radically different than an elf, but they are pretty much like not much else out there.
Hmm.
And um, and so we're doing all these things in conjunction. We have an incredible team with like massive experience, and um, and we're also looking at doing a crowdfunding campaign.
I see. I see.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so what makes you think that like you at this point that you won't end up like the other startups that like don't deliver something now that you're dependent on this funding? Because a
Because
lot
we've
of
already
because that's like
well,
that's where all the companies fail, really. They fail and like they just can't raise enough funding.
no. They failed because they didn't deliver on product. Many of
Right.
them got plenty of money.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, we had six figures of investment and orders,
Mhm.
and we delivered, and we
Yeah.
continued to deliver. And so we know how to deliver. And so all we need is the right amount of support, and we will get that train going, and it won't have to stop.
Hmm. How much funding are you guys needing?
Well, the good part is that, just as Aptera is more car-like, the threshold to get to the manufacturing spot, and I'm not sure what they say it is now. Is it 160 million additional they need? Is that
They
correct?
need 60 million additional.
Well, there's 60 million, but that gets them to
Low volume.
low
Yeah.
volume. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah, I mean like, like Rivian and Lucid, they got like $4 billion. So
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's just crazy. And then
yeah.
so you guys are on the other end, like how much are you guys needing like a
So
10 million or 5 million or I don't know.
so so we're actually in the midst of a friends and family round that's 3 million,
Okay.
and that helps seed the crowdfunding campaign,
Hmm.
which there's sort of built-in limits, right, on the crowdfunding.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're not looking to max those out. Maybe the CF one, but if we get into Reg A, we're not looking to max that out.
Hmm.
But part of our not issue, excuse me. So part of the advantage we have a very low threshold to get into production.
Okay.
As I was talking with my board today,
Hmm.
we can set up work cells for literally a fraction of what it costs to build anything that resembles a car,
Yeah.
anything close. In fact, many regards, cheaper than building a bicycle or a motorcycle.
Okay.
Um, and so um, we have a very low bar at that. The other part is that as soon as we have enough orders,
Mhm.
the starter pistol goes off. If we have 1,000 orders, we're beginning. And
Is that
um,
with or without funding?
no funding. We already have some funding now.
Okay. So if
Yeah.
you got 1,000 orders now, would
Hmm.
you guys start building? Like is app is Elf 2.0, is it done? Like is the design done?
Um, so the cool thing is it carried on through the legacy of the company.
Uh-huh.
So the only thing that's changed about ELF 2.0 is that in the past, say, 4 years or whatever, through COVID and everything else, there's different supply chain issues. There's
Mm.
different battery motor options. Most of that's only gotten better,
Yeah,
right?
right.
We used to
Uh-huh.
build our own battery packs
Yeah.
because we didn't like what was out there.
Uh-huh.
And incidentally, we never had a battery fire.
Uh-huh.
Think about that for the e-bike world.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mm.
And that's because we built them in house. We
Yeah.
get like Sanyo cells and Panasonic cells. We mount them in BMS and we put it in our own cases that were insulated, waterproof,
Hmm.
and our own uh, SP Anderson clip, like old school, heavy duty, clip that was as rugged as can be. And um, not to say things couldn't have happened or didn't happen or all that stuff, but like we really went out of our way to make it right.
Uh-huh.
And so, but the other part is we built it in the most expensive part of the world to build something.
Yeah.
And we built it in a downtown environment.
Hmm.
Now, talk to any manufacturer. That's ridiculous. It's unheard of. You don't do that. And
Hmm.
so we won't be doing that again.
Okay.
We did that as because it was a model. We wanted to figure out, get our feet on the ground and prove out the points. But we have so much interest out of the EU, let's say,
Okay.
so much interest. Probably the German market equates potentially the entire American market.
Okay.
So when we utilize other supply chains in, let's say, Europe
Uh-huh.
or Southeast Asia, and we incorporate that into the US assembly and supply chain,
Uh-huh.
we not only um, lower our costs significantly, of
Hmm.
course, but we also set a stake in the ground for distribution in those regions as well.
Mm. This is sounding very familiar.
As really as Aptera.
Yeah, Aptera is like has most of their parts from the EU now, and the batteries are probably from Asia, and the assemblies in the US.
Right. So um, I mean, we could end up with an American battery, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a possibility.
Hmm.
Um, uh, Probably about 35 to 50% of the parts of the ELF will be manufactured in the US.
Okay.
But then other key elements will come from other places. And again, part of that is to put that stake in the ground because we know those markets are incredibly viable too.
Mm. Yeah,
So
yeah.
those become assembly points for entire ELFs also.
So can you give me kind of like the major differences between Elf 1.0 and Elf 2.0?
So as people, plenty of elf, there's the 850 owners, there's the 5 or 10,000 people that have ridden in them or on them, or 20,000, whatever. There's the people that have bought them used. There was a whole website set up exchanging used elves and things like that at some point. But, um, uh, the elf was very much like a race car, right? Um, that um, kind of harsh, kind of crude, but boy, efficient and got the job done.
Okay.
And and first bicycles of course didn't have suspension, and
Hmm.
occasionally some did and that, but mostly they didn't, and mostly they still don't,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
Now, we have really great suspension in the seat. Let's say the seat's very comfortable, but we only use a rubber suspension, elastomers, for suspension in the front. And even though the rear wishbone in the back originally was a suspension, as we beefed up the stability of the vehicle and stuff, it eliminated that component.
Mm.
So that disappeared. But so the Elves will have a very sweet, a very elegant suspension designed into it, a better handling system that actually acts like mm, it's going to handle tremendously well. Um, the uh, Didn't really need it in some regards, but it'll have a floor.
Hmm.
We had half doors and vinyl doors and things like that, but we're going to have very specific doors for it that come off very easily because, if you're in Arizona and you're riding around, you might not want doors ever, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but uh, so suspension, um, comfort. Um, Interesting thing about an elf is that if there was no body on it, you wouldn't know that there's loud noises going on. But because the body not only generates some sound itself, but traps the sound in there, you
Uh-huh.
get the impression like, wow, it's loud, or this and that. And so, like, we're working on serious sound dampening
Okay.
and, beefing up the efficiency,
Uh-huh.
um, um, uh, more solar power, um, very, very interesting battery options that I actually can't disclose at this time,
Uh-huh.
but um, could benefit people, the homeowners and things like that,
Okay.
on the domicile side of things,
All right.
and increase the safety even further. And you know, over time, you really stabilize the price because we think potentially we have enough volume going on that we can really work the numbers out on the pricing.
Mm. Are you gonna like the original Elf was what, 20 miles per hour top speed?
The original one, yes.
Is that gonna remain the same?
Well, the tactical Elf,
Uh,
which was pretty popular, ended up being a class 3 e-bike, and that
mhm.
one cruised at 28 miles an hour.
Okay. And
And
is that what your guys are targeting for 2.0?
pretty much. So,
Okay.
we look at the world that's changed since we were operating, right?
Yeah.
Scooters have come. Who
Mm-hmm.
knows what the power of a scooter is, right? Well,
Yeah.
it's kind of whatever they want it to be.
Yeah.
What's the speed limit? How are they allowed on the bike paths? All these things. Well,
Yeah.
and then on the others, and then e-bikes with class 1, class 2, and class 3.
Yeah.
So there are 28, let's call it 30-mile an hour e-bikes out there.
Yeah.
And then we have the what could be termed as a golf cart revolution,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there's also some other categories, neighborhood electric vehicles and things that didn't exist before,
Mm-hmm.
that the elf actually gets to walk amongst all of them depending on its power, its range, its speed. But the platform itself is
Mm-hmm.
quite variable that can address all those markets.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we look forward to seeing when you guys have the thing finalized and get funding. Like, are you expecting this to happen in a year or less than a year or more than a year?
So I would expect, delivery in less than a year.
Okay. All right. And so when can we see like final specs design of the thing? And where would we be able to see that?
So unlike Aptera, right,
Uh-huh.
which has been doing this for years, and I do love it, here's our chassis, right? Here's a battery technology, all those
Yeah.
things. That's almost a job or multiple jobs in itself, right? Like, and here's what we're doing with this, here's what we're doing with that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we just want to deliver the product and get the satisfaction going. And over time, we'll talk about these different things, but a
Hmm.
lot of it is kind of like a little bit secret sauce,
I see.
to be honest with you. And,
Uh-huh.
there was not a lot of copycats, but there was plenty of them out there.
Uh-huh.
And all I had to do is buy one and like, oh, how'd they do this? How'd they do that? And that's the way of the world, right?
Right.
Um, Imitation is the highest form of flattery, or so
Yeah.
they say. But
Yeah.
um, one of the things we have going for us is it's not just, oh, look at that's how they did that. It's how do you dial that in?
Okay.
How does that get finessed? And also, how do you build the product so you give people advantages that they didn't even know existed at a cost that makes it reasonable? And
Uh-huh.
that's the key, right? So every time during that design process, we're thinking about, of course, not only the usability and the robustness and stuff, but like, what's that like on the warranty side? What's that like on the supply chain side? What's
Mm.
that like on the manufacturing side? So, for instance, we're in talks with this guy. He's a senior automotive manufacturing engineer,
Hmm.
and he set up incredible assembly lines for cars we all know and love.
Hmm.
And he looked at this and said, "Wow, you know what I can do here on this?" And if I told you the numbers that he could produce them at,
Hmm.
you'd be shocked, because I'm shocked.
Okay.
And so we have a great team supporting all this. And as one of my good friends and investor said, In the case of the space between a bicycle and a car, when it comes to an elf, that type of vehicle, that type of transportation, the hole is bigger than the donut. Like there's a greater demand than there is possibly that could be conceived of.
Okay.
And like for instance, about 7-8% of our customers were disabled.
Okay.
They couldn't drive a car, and
Okay.
for a variety of reasons, and many of them couldn't ride a bike, but they can
Hmm.
ride an elf.
Okay.
And some of them have macular degeneration, some of them have artificial limbs, some of them have autism,
Hmm.
certain things that might really get in the way of like just climbing on your car and driving 80 miles an hour. They can't
Hmm.
do it. But,
Yeah.
and maybe, they just don't have the balance to ride a bicycle or really concerned on safety. But we had so many people get in an elf and like go, you know, and so that's our audience. It's
Nice. Yeah.
as many people as need to get to home or work or shopping or have fun or get in shape as possible without spending a lot of money and really would like to benefit themselves and the environment at the same time.
Okay. So if people were interested in ordering, um, when they find out like pricing and specs, like, because people kind of want to know what they're getting, right?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
And if you look at almost every vehicle company that's ever been and they
Uh-huh.
talk about the pricing
Yeah.
in the, prior to it, it's inevitably wrong.
Right. Yeah. Like
You know,
I had a Cybertruck on order and they said it was $39,000.
right? Perfect example.
Yeah.
Um, and Arkimoto, which God rest their soul, I think
Yeah.
was a really cool vehicle. Somebody pointed out, and I didn't follow each and every detail. They said,
Mm.
they said when it was going to come out, it was going to be $12,000 and it was going to have a 150 mile range.
Yeah.
And when it came out, it was $25,000 and it had a 75-mile range.
Uh-huh.
And I understand that dynamic. I
Yeah.
understand all the potential, but um, you know, we actually um, delivered product before reasonably priced,
Yeah.
and there's so many factors now that help us deliver on that. And
Yeah.
so on
So
this,
you guys aren't gonna say a price until it's ready to deliver,
well, we'll come.
which I
We'll have,
respect that. I like
yeah.
that
Well,
actually.
yes. Well, as soon as we have a pretty good indication, we will.
Uh-huh.
And hey, to be totally upfront, as we all know, a heavily outfitted vehicle is much more profitable than a lean, vehicle, right? So
Hmm.
when you buy I don't know, if you bought a new Corvette, which is 100 grand or something, um, they'd love to sell you that,
Hmm.
but they don't make nearly as much money, let's say, on I don't even know if they make bolts anymore,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but whatever that tiny little Chevy might be.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so um, fortunately, a lot of people like the accessories that belong on an Elf. Hey, I do want the extra battery pack. I want the extra inverters to be able to power my power tools. I want
Uh-huh.
the bigger solar panel, all these sorts of things. And that helps us deliver product and meet some margins and be able to employ people and carry on.
Yeah. Okay. So should we go to this, or I found two websites for you. I found this organictransit.com
Yeah.
and I found this Etapods, ETA pods.
Oh,
That's you too, right?
so ETA, Environmental Transit Authority, is the parent company
Uh-huh.
of Organic Transit.
Gotcha.
So we
Okay.
bought Organic Transit back,
Uh-huh.
and but they can go to organictransit.com and get on the ELF wait list.
Okay. And then
And that'll
that's how you would get information.
Yes, and we'll be putting out a newsletter pretty soon, and
Uh-huh.
we'll be doing interviews and podcasts, and then
Uh-huh.
and we'll introduce everybody to the crowdfunding platform we choose, and we're really excited about that, as like many of our uh, future consumers are.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Um, I look forward to seeing Elf 2.0 because like I said, I'm a big cyclist and I really like that whole space in between a car and a bicycle. I think you guys are in more on the bicycle side, which is great. I think we talked briefly before we started this interview about that Nimbus EV
Yes,
vehicle. I really like that because that kind of like if I were to put him on a continuum, I would say like bicycle, then Elf, and then this Nimbus looking thing, Nimbus kind of Arkimoto as well, and then
yes,
Aptera, and then like regular cars.
right.
Um, it would be nice to get a vehicle that's like pretty fast, like maybe like 40, 45 miles per hour can go on, keep up with cars on neighborhood roads and
So
has range.
that's in the actually that just exceeds the neighborhood electric vehicle, light electric vehicle, or sort of like that golf cart category. I
Uh-huh.
think they also are limited to 30 miles an hour, but when you think about it, they can go 30 miles an hour without any pedal assist.
Yeah.
And they, in some states, I think California is one of them, they actually are supposed to be able to hit 40 miles an hour, but they're limited to roads that are 35 or under. And the
I
speed
see.
limit federally is still 30, I believe. So
Mhm.
state to state, it's a different thing. But we do have, we're going to do another larger version of the ELF. And I say larger, it's still, you know, 400 pounds or less. It's
Mhm.
like a golf cart that was built by Lotus or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And, and you know, peppier, um, uh, higher carrying capacity, really a different vehicle, and pedaling will be an option.
Hmm.
So some people won't really care, some people do. But the cool thing about pedaling, and everyone ought to know this, is like a tandem bicycle puts about the same torque as a V6 internal combustion motor.
Okay.
So when you
I
think
had no
about that
idea.
much torque that
Uh-huh.
happens instantaneously, you know it. If you're riding your bike and you stand on those pedals and you pull on the handlebars and you're getting up this hill, wow, right? That's impressive. Well, if you apply that in tandem, two people, that they used to call it the same as a small block Chevy, but now V6s are where a small block Chevy was.
Hmm.
But we put out a tremendous amount of torque, and when that torque, human torque, is combined with the high RPM power coming out of electric, it's really when it's harmonized together, it's really a lovely thing
Mm.
when you
Yeah.
take both human and electric. And so we're taking it now to that next level, and that makes it totally usable for a variety of purposes, whether it's delivering in cargo or commuting or recreational. Um, and that, you know, we used to say our youngest customer is 14 and our oldest customer is 94. And the guy who was 94 lived way up in the west coast of northern Canada, and they dropped it off in an airplane, and he hopped in it and rode away. And
Wow.
his daughter told me he's been riding it every day ever since. Of course, that was years ago. I
Uh-huh.
hope he's still riding it.
Well, that's
But
awesome.
14 to 94.
That is great. That is great. All right, Rob. Any closing thoughts or?
Well, you know, you know, my hopes go out to Aptera that they can pull all this together, right?
Mhm.
Because this is that giant hurdle or that cliff. Um, what the difference between us and them is like our threshold of manufacturing is much much lower, and um, and so we have a less of a steeper climb to get there. And the
Yeah.
fact that we've delivered the 850 vehicles already, that's a validation. And so all that information, and we have tons of information of what we've gotten back from our customers that will be rolling into these new models. It's really exciting. And I'm just happy to be here at a time. You know, we used to talk, you know, the investors would come and say, oh, this is really cool, but we think you're too early. And I said, well, I hope to God we're not too late. And now I think we're right on time.
Great. Awesome. All right. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on.